ICT International Radio, 106.2 FM, from Israel to the world.
Special interviews, highlights, and live broadcasts from ICT's annual international conference.
Hello and welcome to IDC International Radio 106.2 FM. You're listening to me, Sabrina, Zeloof, covering the 17th Annual World Summit on Counter-Terrorism. And with me today in the studio is Dr. Michael Borchard. Welcome.
I'm happy to be here.
So you are the director at CAS. I've just practiced it. It's Konrad-Adenauer-Stiftung. Is that correct?
That's absolutely perfect pronunciation.
So you're the director of this organization that from now on we'll call it CAS.
Yeah.
So tell us a bit about yourself. How did you get to enter this field?
Well, I was hired by the Konrad-Adenauer-Stiftung because I was an expert on election campaigns, and I worked for a long time for some high-ranking German politicians, including the former Chancellor Helmut Kohl, who unfortunately deceased a couple of weeks ago. So that was an exciting time. And after that, I was asked if I would like to join the Konrad-Adenauer-Stiftung. And for 11 years, I was heading the think tank there. And after 11 years, I thought I could do something else. So I approached my bosses and I said, is there something I can do? And they said, well, we know that you're affiliated with Israel, you like Israel. So how would it be if you would had the office in Jerusalem? And I said, that's exactly what I want to do, and that's what I did.
Amazing. So you got an opportunity to relocate, and you got to keep stay at your previous job, which is amazing. And what does CAS do in Jerusalem? What's the nature of the?
We are in Israel since 35 years, and the essence of the idea of the work of the German political foundations in Israel is that we bring the two civil societies together in terms of really problem solving. So we do conferences, for instance, with the Van Leer Institute about working poor, socio-economic issues. We do conferences with the INSS about the Iran deal.
Right.
We do conferences with organizations like EcoPeace about water and water scarcity in the Middle East. So it's really it's a huge range of issues. Some people in Israel would think we are obsessed with the conflict, but that's actually not true.
There's definitely a perception that European and specifically German intervention in Israel is very much conflict orientated.
But that's not the case. So we are really in a huge variety of fields.
No, I'm happy to hear.
And it's really the idea to bring the two civil societies together. And what we also do is a lot of research. From this post I previously had to be the head of the think tank, I brought my own fetish to Israel, my own obsession.
What is your obsession?
And that's to do empirical research. So I did a lot of surveys here.
Okay, among Israelis?
Among Israelis, exactly. So what we asked them, for instance, is how do you see the German-Israeli relations? How do you see the EU-Israeli relations?
And what did you find?
We just presented recently a survey. It's quite interesting. We do these kind of surveys since almost 15 years, and since these 15 years, we see a severe downfall in the favorability of the EU in Israel. But for the first time since Brexit, after Brexit, we can see that it's slightly, very slightly going up again.
That's interesting. Why do you think there was the decline initially? Do you think it has to do with maybe the EU having a bit more of a geopolitical agenda?
It's a couple of reasons. I think there's some disappointment about decisions that have been made on the European level. The labeling issue was not very helpful in that regard. So that contributed surely to the downfall. It's the fear of anti-Semitism in Europe that contributes to a more skeptic view. But there's also, I would say, the change in the society in Israel that you can really see that the Mizrahi are a little bit more skeptical when it comes to the EU than, for instance, the Ashkenazim.
Who maybe have closer affiliation with Europe.
Naturally. And I think this also frames a little bit the way Europe is being seen. So it's a couple of reasons. It's multi-dimensional. But under the bottom line, it's interesting to see that after these years of a severe downfall, it's going up slightly.
I wonder what Brexit, why that's caused a change. Do you have any explanation or potential
There's one explanation
hypothesis?
that we have. We asked in the same survey, because it was not only after Brexit but also after Trump election. Do you think that the EU should play a more active role after the election of Trump? And actually here a lot of people said yes. It's a majority who said yes, the EU should play a more active role. So maybe that was at least my interpretation. My interpretation was that people would say, well, Trump seems to be a friend, but a very unpredictable friend.
Exactly. The volatility.
The volatility,
you
right.
Put your eggs in multiple baskets.
Right. And here you have the EU, and maybe there's some cooling down in the relations, and you're not happy with this kind of friend, but you still know what he or she is doing. So there's a huge amount of predictability, reliability. So I think this maybe contributes to, I don't know, is it really a sustainable change? Is it a turnaround? It's just an end of the downfall, I would say.
I think at the end of the day, there are still there may be differences in perspectives and, different interests, but there are still a lot of shared core interests
That's the point.
There can definitely be relations built upon that.
This is why we wanted to do this survey, because this paradoxon that in the same time we have the most intense relations when it comes to cultural, social, economic, so forth and so on dimensions, but in the same time we have this kind of alienation between the two. So I think we have to fight that.
Yeah, I think the way to fight it is, if you look at the nature of the relationship, my personal opinion is, if you keep it economically orientated and on common interests, then there's a lot of potential to thrive. But I think the Israelis reject the notion that this entity, that at the end of the day we're not part of it, we're not an EU member, but that they try to involve themselves in the conflict and kind of provide their own conflict resolution. I think that's where a lot of Israelis reject.
That's one part of the explanation. I would say that the litmus test of the relations really is the issue of anti-Semitism. And we also had that in the same survey. You could clearly see that there is a severe, really a significant fear among Israelis that Jews are not safe in Europe anymore. And that has to do with influx of immigrants, all these kind of explanations that are on the table. But I think the EU has to make very clear to Israel that it is fighting anti-Semitism. That's one part, and I think the other part is, so far the approach of the EU was kind of I would call it a conditionality approach. It's a little bit sticks and carrots. So, but if you have a sticks and carrots approach, the sticks have to be very painful and the carrots very tasty.
That's true.
But if you offer a special privileged partnership, actually the question is, what are you offering what Israel does not already enjoy? That's one of the points, and this conditionality approach also kind of hinders progress on the ground when it really comes to issues like water and other issues, where the EU can contribute and can help to really manage things in a good way. And I think this approach was wrong. And what I feel is that there is a slight shift of paradigm on the side of the EU. So I'm very, very cautiously optimistic here.
Okay, well, we'll let time tell see what happens.
What's happening? Sure.
Yeah, I wanted to ask. You spoke briefly about immigration. We're here at this, World Summit on Counter-Terrorism, and there's a lot of talk, especially in Europe, and even more, especially specifically in Germany, how immigration poses a potential security threat. What's your take on this?
Well, my take on this is we have to see the biggest threat is not the first generation immigrants. It's not the refugees coming right now from Syria. What they want to do is to settle down, and they have a lot of them have been victims of real cruelties, and so they don't want to stick with radicals. But the problem in Germany, not only in Germany, also throughout Europe, is we have a second generation radicalization. It's the second, even the third generation of migrants, and the problem that they have is in Germany they are being called the Turks. In Turkey they are being called the Deutschländer, the Germans. So they are sitting right between the chairs.
In an identity crisis.
They are absolutely right. They are absolutely in an identity crisis, and if they come to the wrong peers, if they come especially to peers that are in religious echelons, it can be very, very dangerous. So you can really see that those who do not know much about Islam, do not know much about their own identity, might stick to those people who are radicals. And then the radicalization starts. So I think to not only apply tools of counterterrorism, which is like dealing with the immediate terrorism threat, but we should also try to counter-radicalize people. So
and maybe it's not even about de-radicalization, it's preventing it in the first place.
Right. So it should be a good combination. And here I really have, coming back to the issue that we were talking about previously, I would say we have to apply a good combination of soft power and hard power. And I think here we could have a good cooperation between Israel and Europe and also Germany, because, of course, Israel is the provider in the world when it comes to hard power. How security services will work together, the way that the society in Israel applies resilience and is resilient against these terror attacks. But we are not so bad in terms of soft power, these counter-radicalization strategies.
Well, I mean,
so
are they so
combine
successful?
those...
Because the way I see it, the soft power, it can only work if there's real integration. But it doesn't seem, it seems like more and more we hear about no-go zones and segregated areas and more separation between the Muslim communities in Europe and the European communities. So how, it doesn't seem that there's such a successful track record with the soft power.
Well, it's getting better, one has to say. The specific problem in Germany was that for a long time we didn't really do a systematic approach when it comes to integration policy. Because the basic notion was these people are going back to their home countries after some time. And only since the 90s we started to establish this kind of a systematic, really planned and effective integration policy. And there is a generation now of young leaders with Muslim background that are fully integrated. They are more German than I am, actually, in a very good sense. We had a very interesting project here. What I did is I brought for the last two rounds or 2 times I brought a group of German young leaders to Israel for about 4 or 5 days. And these young leaders have all been Muslims, members of parliament, member of the state parliaments, founders of startup companies, you name it, academicians. So they came to Israel, and it was a very interesting experience for both sides. Wow. Because they got rid of their stereotypes, and they thought that it's really good to be here and to know what Israel is all about.
To see the facts on the
ground. Also in Israel, it kind of killed the stereotype of all Muslims are potential anti-Semites, and so I think it was a twofold, very, very positive experience.
Well, it sounds
I'm not pushing away the problems. There are significant problems, and there are in some cities parallel societies. But I think the situation is improving right now, and there are a lot of second generation, third generation migrants that are totally German, and a huge contribution to the German society. Even when it comes to the question of the Shoah, it's interesting to see that some of these people who participated said in the end, I am a German, I decided to apply for the German citizenship, so the Shoah is also part of my German identity.
Wow.
And this was one of in the 3 years I've been here now in Israel, this was one of the most impressive experiences I made, to see these people saying, well, that's part of my heritage now.
It's very full circle.
Yeah, it's part of my heritage, even though my father was in Anatolia or wherever, but this is now, I'm a German, so this is part of my identity.
Well, really, thank you for sharing your optimistic wisdom with us. And I hope, you have even though you're coming to the end of your time here in Israel, I hope that you come back next year to the conference and we can continue talking.
If I get an invitation, I come.
Thank you so much.
Pleasure.